Hi, good day everyone. This is Sir Jet and welcome to the online classes here in SS33. Our lesson for today is what is globalization? So without further ado, let's get started. Let's go to the computer. And globalization is a topic that is very, very relevant to us people in the modern times. We eat globalization 3 times a day. We breathe it every moment. It's part of our bloodstream. We people of the modern times. But we may not be very much aware of it. So the objective of our lesson today is to break the ice, to see in a nutshell what is this thing called globalization that we will be talking about for the whole term. For today, we will formulate a personal diagnostic definition of globalization. And then I will share to you the descriptions of globalization, and at the end of our session, we will be on the same plane. We will be agreeing on a working definition of globalization for this course. Alright? So, let me ask you the diagnostic question. What is globalization for you? No web browsing. I know millennials love to web browse every time they hear a new word. But for today, just squeeze your mind. Whatever comes out of your brain when you hear the word globalization, say it out. Okay? There are no wrong answers. Some of you may say, oh, globalization is modernization, or globalization is development, or globalization is this and that. No problem. Whatever you have in your mind, just hold on to it and compare it to what you will hear in the following slides. Okay? So, I will be giving to you now 7 descriptions of globalization. These are not definitions but descriptions. For you to see piece by piece, or maybe for you to have clues what globalization is all about. So, first description of globalization. Okay, there are 7. Okay. The first one is globalization is a phenomenon. Phenomenon is another word for event. So globalization is an event. It is something on the history timeline. You have a timeline in mathematics. It's similar to history. We also have a timeline. And on the timeline are events like a war, an earthquake, a king's reign, or any other thing happening around us, okay, that is part of human history, like a volcanic eruption or your birthday even. So globalization is just like one of these things, okay? And if we will put globalization on the history timeline, it would belong to the contemporary times. That's why the title of our course is The Contemporary World. Now let me illustrate to you the history timeline and show to you which part of the timeline can we see globalization. So we will move over to our board. Okay, so we have an elegant studio over here, complete with computer and a whiteboard. Right? Fantastic. All right. So in mathematics, you have a number line. Right. So in history, you also have a number line, and we call it the history timeline. One end would be eternity past, and over here the other end would be eternity future, and somewhere in the middle is the boundary of the BC and the AD, or now it's called BCE and the BC years. And 2020, our time, is over here. Okay, and we say globalization is an event or a phenomenon, and it's happening over here on this side of the number line or the history timeline. So this is globalization on the history timeline, and it's toward the contemporary side, because that side is the ancient side and this side is the modern side. So it's an event happening on the contemporary side of the number line or the history timeline. Okay, so that's the first description of globalization. The second description is globalization is a process. So it is not something that happened or that happens in a zap. Okay? So it takes time. Globalization takes time. On the history timeline, as you can see a while ago in our board, it is not a point, but rather it is an area. Okay? It is a point from point A to point B, and all the things in between. That is globalization. So it is a process. It's not a single dot, but an area, and it undergoes different stages. So this part over here would be the early stage, and we have the latter stage of globalization. So it is a process. Okay, so that's the second description of globalization. Number 3, globalization has drivers. So a car has a driver. For a car to go from point A to point B, it needs a driver. Without a driver, it goes nowhere. And so globalization happens because of drivers. And these are reasons why globalization takes place. We call them drivers. And what are these? These can be events. It can be people. And the likes, okay, that serve as the stimuli or spark for globalization to start rolling. Example would be migration. It's an event, okay, and the migration of people causes globalization. And we will discuss more about that as we go along the term. But right now, I'm just presenting to you that one description of globalization is that it has drivers. And the drivers is plural. That means there is no single one driver of globalization. Globalization happens because of a combination of several factors or several drivers. Number 4, globalization involves the collapsing of borders. You know, there are divisions or a divide between countries and people of the world. And these are not necessarily borderlines or literal borders between countries, but actually figurative walls that divide the interaction between individuals standing on one country and another in another country. Or it can be a figurative wall dividing nations and governments of the world. Now that is in the beginning, but because of globalization in the modern times, we have these walls broken down. Okay, we have these walls dividing countries disappear, and that's globalization, when there are no more walls between the countries and the people of the world. Number 5, globalization involves the shrinking of the world. Not that the planet gets smaller physically, but this is another figure of speech. The world becomes smaller because it means that individuals, nations, and governments now have ease in interaction. Before, people have difficulty communicating or traveling from one country to another, do business and other stuff with one another. But because of globalization, people get connected easily and also faster. And so the people of the world can now say, oh, it's a small world after all. How long is travel time from here to Korea? Maybe in the time of Magellan it would take weeks, months. But now, just 3 hours, 4 hours, you would be in Korea. So you can say it's a small world after all. Next, globalization is geographic. What do I mean by this? Some places on Earth experience globalization, just like what we are experiencing right now in the Philippines. Whilst, believe it or not, some places on Earth, they don't experience globalization yet. Okay? Example would be the Bushman tribe in South Africa. Do you know the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy? It's a 1980 film, a comedy about the Bushmen. It's a tribe in South Africa that's living the same way they did 1,000 years ago. And just several kilometers from their home in the Kalahari Desert, there are skyscrapers, cars, factories. And so globalization is experienced on one side of the earth or one side of a country, and then some parts of the world or a country may not be experiencing globalization, and the people there are not affected by globalization. And that's just one example. There are still a handful of places on earth not yet experiencing globalization. So globalization is geographic. It's confined in just some geographic areas. Lastly, globalization is inevitable. It means globalization cannot be stopped. Globalization is spreading from one place into another place. Because globalization is a process, there will come a time that all places on earth will experience it. In the latter stages of globalization, it will spread to every part of the planet. And that process cannot be avoided. Going back to the story of The Gods Must Be Crazy film, the plot goes like this. A bottle of Coca-Cola fell from the sky and into the desert. How did that happen? Because a pilot riding the airplane, after finishing off the Coca-Cola drink, he threw the bottle out the window, and it fell on the Kalahari Desert, and the Bushmen people picked it up and thought that the gods must have given them something. And they can't figure out at first what that something is. And later on, because of that Coca-Cola bottle, they became globalized. And so that's the scenario in other places all over the world. Globalization is penetrating those places, and it's inevitable. Time will come when the whole world would be said to be globalized. So, what are again the 7 descriptions of globalization? Number 1, globalization is an event it is a phenomenon. Number two, it is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's continuing. And then globalization has factors or drivers, and there are many. Globalization involves the collapsing of borders. And because of this, the world shrinks. That's one effect of globalization, the shrinking of the world. And globalization is geographic. Some places have it, some places don't. But time will come that globalization will spread all over the world. And so we say globalization is inevitable. All right, so I hope you got these 7 descriptions of globalization in your notes, because I have some tasks for you to do after watching this video. Number 1, I want you to make your own definition of globalization based on the 7 descriptions I just gave you. Okay, put them all together and make your own definition in your own words. Maybe a single sentence definition of globalization. All right? And where will you write this? You put this in the discussion board in our Blackboard. Okay, so you go to Blackboard, you find our class, and then there's a button there which says discussion board. I will open it, and you can put there your own definition of globalization. Now, in the same entry, in the same box where you write the definition of globalization, you go to your room, this is task number 2, and choose 5 items you have in your possession. Like in your bedroom, probably there's your cell phone, you have a teddy bear, you have a TV, whatever you have there in your bedroom, choose 5 and write it down. That would be your task number 2. And opposite each of those 5 items, you write the country of origin of that item. So you have a cell phone, it's made in Korea, so you write there Korea. And your teddy bear is made in England, so you write there England or UK. So choose 5. Now, after which you go to the kitchen and you do the same thing. You can open the ref, or you can just look at the table, whatever item you have there, choose 5. Okay, so if you have a sardine can or a can of sardines, you have noodles, you have an apple, so choose 5 and then write also the country of origin of those things in the kitchen. Okay? Task number 4, you would have 10 items, 5 in the bedroom, 5 in the kitchen. Of the 10 items, which country is most mentioned? Okay, so you identify that country. Maybe 7 out of the 10 items you listed is made in just one country. What country is that? So write it down. And task number 5, you discuss maybe just 1 or 2 sentences why certain products are made in the Philippines while others are produced abroad. Okay, so you answer that essay question and put it in your Blackboard discussion board. All right, and remember that your Blackboard discussion board has a time limit. It's not forever open, so you have to be quick also in writing down the stuff that I'm asking you. Alright, so I want to see you again in our next meeting. We will be doing something very exciting in our next meeting. So until then, this is Sir Jet. Good night or good day, and God bless.